Hi, Assalamualaikum and Salam Sejahtera. You're watching a very special recording of Hari Malaysia Baharu. And if you notice, we've started dwindling down, dialing back on the leaders and the politicians and the ministers, because the 100 days of the new Malaysia must also focus on wisdom and knowledge. And I'm very, very honored to have with me today a very celebrated, intelligent guy, because I've scoured Google, and one of the quote that I want to take is the most intelligent man in Egypt, Professor Dr. Ismail Sirajuddin. He has been a vice president with the World Bank, and that's one story that we'll ask him to sum up very shortly, but he has done more than that. There's this Bibliotheca Alexandrina that I want him to talk about. It's not just a library, even though it has library to its name. And I also want to tap his mind into the challenge of climate change and sustainability, plus how do we go forward with science and technology when the interest of the young people in science and tech is going down? So I'm going to start by asking you to go back into the time tunnel, way back when you were looking at UNESCO and stuff, but it was given to you to think about, the World Bank, and you went there.
Yes.
And you ended up about more than 28 years there. But one thing I want to take out from there, is, how do you look at growth, development, and making people's life better?
Well, I thank you for raising that, and I would really like to thank you for giving me this chance to speak to you, and to thank Mike for organizing this lecture, to thank the Heritage Amana Foundation for bringing me here to the conference I came to. It's a great privilege to be in Malaysia, which has done more successfully than most dealing with that issue. So fundamentally, we all want to help our human family, and that starts with that it is unacceptable that there should be so many hundreds of millions of people who are still going hungry, who don't have enough to eat every day. And therefore, we have to challenge that by not only promoting more growth, but more equitable growth. So inequalities is one part of it. Empowerment of the poor people to become the producers of their own knowledge and welfare rather than the beneficiaries of aid or charity. And to specifically, I would add, to educate girls and empower women, because they are the most successful vector to bring about social transformation. On the whole, humanity has done reasonably well. We have reduced the number of absolute poor as a percentage. We are dealing with a lot of inequalities, even though they have increased in the last decade or so. But we are also discovering that we have had a negative impact on the environment. And thus, finding that critical equation that allows everybody to have a decent life, and at the same time taking care of the ecosystems that support us all, is right now one of the biggest problems that we have to cope with.
Okay. If I take a layman understanding of the word sustainability, some look at it as, don't use up resources that we have now that will shortchange the future generation or the people that will come after us. If we have oil in this country, don't use up every single drop of oil so that my children or my grandchildren wouldn't have any of it. But you have a different look at that particular equation.
Yes.
But that's one of the more popular understanding of what sustainability is.
Yeah, well, I asked the question, what's the difference between having copper or oil in the ground and not using it, and not having oil or copper in the ground? What's the difference between the two? So why would you safeguard it for the future when you don't know what technologies in the future will be like and what they will need and not need? I believe that, in fact, we should think of sustainability as opportunity. And that means that I want the next generation to have as many opportunities as we have had than otherwise. And opportunity can be thought of as capital per person, but not capital in the conventional sense.
Okay.
Capital is 4 kinds of capital.
Right.
So you have the capital in the conventional sense, which is cars, roads, etc. we call them produced assets. Then you have natural capital, which is oil in the ground, water, forest, etc., plus environmental services that they do, like stopping floods, etc. And 3 is human capital, which is that which is embedded in me. So it's education, health, nutrition. If I migrate, I take it with me. Then there is social capital, which is the glue that holds a society together. Now, the 4 kinds of capital can be exchanged one for another. You can take oil out of the ground and educate little girls. So you're transforming one into the other. But you can't use them all up, because if you imagine for a second any of the 4 kinds of capital equal to 0, you cannot imagine a process existing at all. So we want to increase the total, but we accept that the combination may change over time, and that gives us the flexibility to design a strategy that will be sustainable. So human capital, social capital, environmental capital, plus the conventional capital. So that's the way to do it.
Many will agree that we have managed to reduce poverty to the very minimum possible. However, there's a new kind of poverty. My grandparents' time, way back in rural Malaysia, they don't need much cash. The source of protein could come from the environment around them. When it's time for paddy harvesting, they have it from the paddy fields. When there's no paddy, my grandfather could go to the ocean and get protein from there, or can go to, the rivers, or get from the forest. But now, if anyone doesn't have cash in modern society, they'll be hard pressed. The use of pesticide, for example, in agriculture, took that ability to be self-sustaining away from the modern economy. 70% or more, according to statistics of Malaysian population, are in the urban area. And now we have urban poverty. They have money as compared to the definition of poverty before, but they find that they could hardly get much. And the study in this poor housing project that we have around the city, or Klang Valley as we call it, shows that some are even malnourished, malnutrition. So this UNICEF study shocked many people in Malaysia. How can you not have enough food when you are in the capital city, for example? So how do you look at the new definition of poverty? As we increase in wealth, inequality is increasing.
Yes, well, there are 2 things. There's absolute poverty and there's relative poverty. And absolute poverty has different levels as well, but it normally is if you are so poor that you cannot afford the fundamentals of caloric coverage, protein coverage for nutrition, water, housing, clothes to protect you from the cold or the weather. So that's a line, and what we should see is a gradual reduction of the percent of people below that line. Now, it's true that you've had population growth. Population has grown very rapidly in the last century. We went from 2 billion to 7.8 almost, yeah. So I mean it's almost quadrupled on the same planet. So fundamentally there's been that, but the percentage is reduced and we should continue to reduce that. But along with that comes another phenomenon, which is relative poverty. And that means that even in the wealthiest countries, like Sweden, for example, or Norway, well, there are poor people. But they're not poor by our definition here, they're poor by the definition in Sweden. Because when you rank people in a society, there are those who are at the top very rich and those who are at the bottom who are very poor. And the relative poverty is felt, even though, for example, you could say that somebody who doesn't have a television or a refrigerator is considered poor in Norway or United States. Well, we know a lot of people who are living in urban or rural areas in our countries that don't have a television and they're not necessarily poor. So you have these relative situations. Inequality sustained is undermining social sustainability, undermines social capital. You end up with civil wars. You can see that all around Egypt, from Libya to Sudan to Somalia, to Yemen, to Syria, to Iraq. You've got all sorts of wars going on. And it is fomented partly by inequalities, who has more control over resources and why. So we need to fight both battles.
How do we fight both battles? At the same time, increase our knowledge and wisdom. This is what 100 Days Malaysia Baharu is all about. And let's talk about that after this short break. Hi, you're still watching a very special recording of Malaysia Baharu, 100 Days, 100 Hari Malaysia Baharu. Dan we have to look at wisdom and knowledge for the new Malaysia to emerge successfully. So I have with me the most intelligent person in Egypt, still with me. But he's not just sharing his experience of economic and development from the World Bank experience, but also I want to talk about a library.
Ah, yes.
You know, in the days of smartphones, tablets, even in universities in Malaysia, people are telling me that, hey, there's not many students in libraries anymore.
Yes.
But you have a different sort of setup and operation of a library in Egypt.
Indeed.
So can you share with us those?
Yes, I can. I would like to say, first of all, the Ancient Library of Alexandria was the first combination academy, research center, library, zoological garden, botanical garden, you name it. But the library grew and grew and grew to the point where the name of the library covered the whole complex. It had the top scientists of the world who came there and did that. And what we tried to do was to recapture the spirit of the ancient library with the tools of the 21st century,
Okay.
meaning digital material, of course, primarily. And when I left the library last year, we had 1 billion hits a year on our website, half of which were coming from Egypt and the rest from the rest of the world. So that means a lot of young people were interacting with us. Now, why is it that libraries are no longer attractive to people? Well, partly because of the enormous success of such programs as Wikipedia or Google search, etc., that makes people have access to information, and that's wonderful. Because it means that even in rural areas now I can bring this information to them, which I couldn't do before.
Yes.
But why do they still need libraries? Well, it turns out that, and I'm on the visiting committee of MIT libraries, so I advise that. Yeah, they need a space where they can actually interact and argue with each other and draw things on the wall and do all of that. And the library traditionally is a place where, shh,
Correct.
you know,
Yeah.
don't,
Don't-
no, yeah, but no, I mean, we have to create spaces where they can come and interact and even have music and pizza on the floor,
Like a
etc.
hanging out place in Starbucks.
Yeah, well, we need more than even Starbucks, but we can do better than that. Secondly, many students, when they're studying right now, study in groups. So we have to create rooms with them. At law school, medical school, they do that. Then we have our conventional person that we care for, which is the guy writing a PhD thesis who wants his cubicle,
Correct.
no noise,
Yeah.
let me search.
Silent
Okay,
room.
so there's this guy too. That's 3. The 4th one, which we should do, to make the library again the center of campus life, is exhibitions. We can bring magnificent exhibitions to life and have it surrounded by the enormous knowledge resources that are there, interact with the community, not just with the students, and bring the library back to life where you can have constant exhibitions and events in a way that makes the library alive. Why should we care? Well, we should care because libraries are the repositories of knowledge, and they are the link between the past, the present, and the future. And we have to arm the intellectuals of the future, our current professors and future students. We have to arm them with both an appreciation of their heritage and allow them to invent the heritage of the future.
One of the prerequisites for that to really happen is the inquisitiveness.
Yes.
You know, as a child, if you're told, sit down, shut up, listen, then when can the child express? I think you have always throughout your life
Yes.
espoused and being true to finding out why. So
Yes.
how do we inculcate that? Through the use of libraries like what you have there in Egypt. Because statistics have shown all across the world the interest of the young people in science, technology, engineering, and mathematics going down. In this country, we even talk about people not wanting to learn history. So
Yeah,
where
but
are we
that's,
improving?
I think that's because the way it's taught. I don't think it's true. In fact, in Alexandria, I created, my colleagues and I created 400 science clubs in various schools, and where we trained the teachers and we remained in contact with them through computers, and then they would come once a week and visit the library, and we had events for them. The fact is, you know, the average child, when they're very young, they are inquisitive. They will ask you questions like, why is the sky blue? Why are the leaves of the flowers green? Yes. They don't say, is that important for me to pass the exam, or is that going to be relevant for my job? They just want to know. Yes. And we should encourage that inquisitiveness. Unfortunately, in science and math, people have been told, you have to learn this formula by heart. You have to know avocado's number. You have to memorize. That's not an interesting thing to do. Correct. But if you encourage them and take them by the hand on this journey of discovery, science becomes extremely exciting. Secondly, today, with the knowledge at their fingertips through smartphones, which bring basically the whole power of the internet available to any person in any remote area, you have a possibility of engaging with young people on a broad range of issues, including history and including science.
I have to go for the last break, and in case you're wondering, this swanky place is called Malaysia in Cyberjaya, and thanks to Heritage Amanah. I promised the last break, but once we are back, let's notch the heat. I'm already perspiring, but let's notch the heat up a bit. Let's also ask the most intelligent man from Egypt about Islam, politics, and I haven't forgotten about the first block, and how do we solve inequality and poverty when we also have this problem called terrorism and Islamophobia, right after the short break. Thank you for still watching Hari Malaysia Baharu. New Malaysia needs ideas and wisdom to make it a reality. I'm sitting with the most intelligent person from Egypt, so I'm going to go straight to the point. We have talked about inequality, we have talked about poverty, we must combat them both. We have also talked that there are new ways to celebrate knowledge and, you know, encourage people to have wisdom through that. But the world's not perfect. There's a lot of complex problems that we must tackle, from the climate change right up until this thing called terrorism that has disturbed and unbalanced many things across the globe. Islamophobia is one of them. We have huge migration, but people are turning them away as if they're not humans, for example. So I would like to tap into your point of view on that, because I'm sure you have looked and deliberated countless times on this. Yes. In about 5 minutes, please solve the world's problem for me.
Okay, let's start one by one. First of all, I think it is clear that the modern state is both too large and too small to deal with big problems like climate change. So we have to learn to work internationally as well as nationally and locally. Secondly, inequality is a serious issue and it should not be allowed to grow. But you cannot try to have 100% equality. So you must have a legal system that recognizes the possibilities of mobility. So you may be poor today, but then you'll become rich later on. You will invest in your children and they will become better educated than you, and they will stop farming and they will do something else, etc., etc. And the structure of the government should be to facilitate that, not the attitude of some people that the government is the enemy and we have to stop it from interfering and anything else. So that's question one. Question two is what to do about such things as climate change, biodiversity loss, sea level rise, etc. These are very serious issues. They require coordinated action by everybody, and unfortunately not everybody is willing to do their share, but in the end it is to everybody's benefit. I mean, in a sense, what I'm talking about, when people talk about the environment, I said I'm talking about clean air, clean water, fertile soils, opportunity to live without being swamped by storms and hurricanes and tsunamis and so on. Why wouldn't you want to do that for your children?
Correct.
I mean, forget about the environment and what people are. I mean, that's something that you should want for your children. And the route to that is through proper environmental action. And I have the techniques and how to do it. We discussed that during the time of the GEF and other things. Thirdly, I think we have a major problem, which is that a lot of people are worried that they are losing out. And it is easier for politicians to tell them, you're not losing out because your skills are no longer needed. You are losing out because these foreigners have taken your job. These foreigners are now swamping us with their trade. So it's easier to blame somebody else than to say somebody, look, your skills are now obsolete and you have to learn new skills. That's much harder to sell politically than to point at somebody else. And that's part of this phobia that exists against immigration in practically every country. Why Islamophobia? Because Islam has grown inside the West right now. And I was telling some Western leaders recently, look, it's not a problem out there. These are your citizens. They are second, third generation citizens. They are a minority in your country. Remember how you treated minorities before, whether it was the Roma or the Jews or so on. You have to be very careful and treat them properly. For us, we have, as Muslims, have to recognize that we have had a terrible situation where, in fact, extremist groups have taken or appropriated the name of Islam, which should be the most tolerant, most open, most supportive of science and openness in history, to do terrible things. And therefore we have to put our own house in order as we confront others as well.
You have to come back to Malaysia. You know, I want to ask you, why is it nowadays we don't have the new Ibn Sina, Al-Jaber? You're adept at urban planning, engineering stuff, at economics matters and development, and you can talk about Islam and philosophy, but that's another day. I want to end this talk, chat, with one question.
Yes.
We are nearing to the completion of 100 days since this new Malaysia after the last election. So it's good to have an outside look at us. So I want to ask you, how did you look? I'm sure you followed what happened in the last general election for Malaysia and the new administration in power. So how do you look at the new Malaysia?
Well, I really, I'm a guest in this country. I'm very grateful to Might for organizing this event, for Heritage Amana for inviting me. So I really don't want to get too involved with the domestic politics. But I will tell you that Malaysia took a bold step earlier on, a long time ago, when Prime Minister Mahathir served for 24 years. And I knew him, and I was privileged to have him come and lecture at the Library of Alexandria when he left office the first time, by focusing on education, on openness in education, including English language, on openness in collaboration with foreign entities in bringing industries to Malaysia. And I think these are pieces of the solutions to many of our problems. We need also to remember that we cannot throw away our heritage. And that is part of where the difficulty comes in. I say to people, data, when organized, becomes information. Okay. Information, when explained, becomes knowledge. Okay. But that's not enough. We need wisdom. Yes. And wisdom is the ability to reflect on the knowledge and experience and be able to manage it better. So we need to link to the past to create a future that is compatible with our identities. And that's a hard task. But I am convinced that Malaysians that have done so much, from rubber plantations and tin mines to the Petronas towers that we see gracing the sky of KL, I have no doubt that Malaysians will be able, in fact, to continue on their path to a better future.
Professor Doctor, thank you so much for making time. On behalf of all Malaysia who love wisdom, thank you for giving us some. Thanks to Heritage Amana and the 25 to 40-year-old funky people of Nusantara. Thanks to Might Malaysia. This is their place. I've borrowed it for a while. Hopefully, they'll also help us to be the host of debates and stuff like that for the new Malaysia. And I'll see you in another episode of 100 Days Malaysia Baharu. Satu Hari Malaysia Baharu very, very soon. Good night. Goodbye. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Let's take our own photo without him.
Okay.